don't actually have a lot to say on it, but the number one request I got today was to discuss the changes to the postmark system for the USPS. So this is obviously an attempt at voter suppression. I'm probably going to have more thoughts on it as this story develops, but basically the Trump regime has decreed that the post office is going to change the way that they do postmarks. It used to be, right, if you have it at the post office, it hits the post office, it'll be postmarked that day. Now they're saying it has to go to an automated sorting center. So you could drop it off at your little local post office and you can think like, okay, I'm dropping this off on the 27th, it'll be postmarked today, but it doesn't get to the automated sorting facility for a couple of days. It won't actually have a postmark on it until the 29th or 30th, even though you dropped it off at your post office on the 27th. That is a huge change, and it matters a lot for elections because in many states, there's some states where they require you to have your ballot be received by election day, but in an awful lot of states, it just has to be postmarked by election day. So now it creates this problem, right? This is what fascists do. They want to undermine free and fair elections. They don't do it by Starlink zapping the votes. They don't do it by outright canceling elections, despite what bros like Chris Valenti keep saying. The odds of an autocrat completely canceling an election are like nil, because that would result in a giant uprising of the people. They try to have this veneer, this performance as if there was still a democracy happening. So they have elections. It's just that they suppress the vote. They gerrymander, they disenfranchise voters. They use every trick in the book, right? Be it congressional or presidential elections, they use all of these tricks to make it as hard as possible for people to cast their vote. And then at the end, to have their vote counted. They have all these lawsuits and all these reasons why they can exclude your ballot, why they can just completely pitch it. This new move with the post office is one of those. It's one of those we're going to try and exclude your ballot after the fact by saying, oopsie, it doesn't have a postmark in time. You got it postmarked after election day. It doesn't count even if you dropped it off on election day. And this is going to, I think, from what I've read, impact rural voters more, right, who have a small rural office and they're not having their mail delivered to a larger automated sorting facility as quickly. Which to me is like a little bit weird that the Trump regime would do this. Actually, there's so many ways that they try to disenfranchise voters that actually hurts their own voter base, right? You're disenfranchising rural voters, white rural voters in this country overwhelmingly support Donald Trump, support Republicans. So it seems like the group that is most likely to be impacted by this might actually be Republicans. This is why we need more data. I need more information. We need to find out more to realize, to get a better picture, I should say, of who's going to be the most impacted. But regardless, Republicans are always trying to make it as hard as possible for people to vote and as hard as possible for them to have their votes counted. And to me, it's just like, well, gosh, don't you want every American citizen to be able to vote? Don't you want here in the land of the free and the home of the brave? Don't you want in a representative democracy to have the people be able to cast their vote and have their vote be counted? And it's never made any sense to me why Republican voters especially tolerate this whole rhetoric of like, we have to make it as difficult as possible for people to vote. We have to put up so many barriers to voting and so many excuses to throw out votes after the fact. Gosh, doesn't democracy work best when everybody gets to cast their ballot and have it be counted? Yes, it does, which is why Republicans have a vested interest in making sure that we don't have free and fair elections, that we have massive voter suppression, that we have as many voters disenfranchised as possible, because the less fair and free elections are, the less accessible they are to the people, the more likely Republicans are to win. When you have high voter turnout, when you have massive numbers of people getting to the polls, casting their ballots, and having their votes counted, guess who wins? It's not fucking Republicans, I can tell you that. That's why they have a death grip on gerrymandering in so many of these red states that are actually blue or maybe purple states. They establish power and they hold on to that power through crooked means, through gerrymandering, so that they have their state congressional seats and then their federal congressional seats all gerrymandered to hell. And then that gives them the power to influence all kinds of other voting laws about who gets to register, where polling locations are, how you count mail-in ballots, who is eligible to mail in and vote absentee. Here in Oregon, we've had vote by mail for like decades, as long as I've lived here, and we have a very high voter turnout. It's very easy. It's very easy to vote, and if you can't mail it in, there are drop-off locations all over the city. There's one within walking distance of my house. when you reduce barriers to access, guess what? More people can participate in the process of democracy. So when you make it as hard as possible, when you make it so that like, oh, we're gonna have a little technicality here. So yeah, you drop off your ballot on election day and you think it's gonna be postmarked because for the whole history of the Postal Service, that's been the rule. We're changing that up just in time for the midterms because we know Republicans are gonna get their asses handed to them if we have free and fair elections. They're rolling out all these little sneaky, hinky things to throw away a few votes here, discount a few votes there, make it so people don't actually get to the polls in time here, make it so that people are dropped off the voter registrations over there. Because if they don't cheat like that, they can't win. And they know that they're going to be in big, big trouble in the midterms. So they're desperate to cheat in all of these little ways. And I know that people love to think of these big, sexy conspiracy theories that are far more complicated. But the reality is that classic Republican voter suppression techniques have worked incredibly well for decades and decades and decades. So they're just leaning really hard into those because they're like, oh yeah, well, why reinvent the wheel? This is a playbook that's gone great for us for a long time. Let's just step it up a little bit. Let's amp that up a little bit because we know even with all of this voter suppression that when we have massive turnout that the people can overcome, right? It's too big to rig. Huge voter turnout means that you can overcome all of the kind of hinky shit that they're doing. So they're like, shit, we got to do more of that. Because otherwise they're not going to win. I don't want people to flip out over this. A lot of people in my comments were really, really flipping out over it. Our job is to educate people, right? Okay, the regime does something shitty and terrible and illegal and whatever, anti-democratic. Okay, our job is to figure out how we respond, to mitigate that harm, to overcome the hurdles they have now put in place. Do we all understand what the assignment is? We are educating people about the new rules for the post office. We are all getting involved in get out the vote movements. We're helping people register to vote. We are volunteering with voter organizations. We are volunteering to be poll watchers. Maybe we're running for elected office so that we can be elected officials who oversee local, municipal, city, state, whatever, county elections, right? We're all doing that now. We all are getting really, really involved in the democratic process, in the election process, right? Our response is fuck you, make me. So if they are trying to be like, okay, we're going to make it so that you can't vote or so that your vote gets thrown out, we're going to be like, oh no, bitch, we're going to redouble our efforts to make sure we all get to the polls. We have huge voter turnout. We are going to overcome your attempts to cheat. Right? One of the key ways that we defend democracy is not to be like these doomer influencer bros who get on there and be like, oh, you think there are going to be elections in 2026? Oh, there's not going to be a presidential election in 2028. First of all, that's a bunch of bullshit. As I said earlier, we're going to have elections. The way to respond when the regime does things like this is that we get busy, we get organizing, we make sure that we are heavily invested in the midterms. And I do want to say here at the end, this is going to have far-reaching consequences beyond elections. Think of all of the things for which you need a postmark by a certain date. Your taxes, your rent, all kinds of bills, insurance premiums. I mean, there's a long list, especially for older Americans who still overwhelmingly pay their bills via the mail system. There are broad-reaching consequences to changing the way that they do the postmark, to this nonsensical, inefficient, obvious attempt to fucking cheat in the midterms. Sorry to keep swearing. I also think that it is really emblematic of living in a kakistocracy where they really want to render the kind of institutions and norms completely untrustworthy, right? They want to make it so that every component of our society, every working of the federal government is no longer reliable. They try to break shit so that they can claim that they need to come in and fix it and make it better. But also in general, they just want you to constantly have your head spinning, to have no sense of reliability or expectation. That's a pretty classic autocratic move to try and destabilize a society. So I think that there is the intended consequence in terms of the elections, but I think all of the other negative consequences for us and the ways it's going to make things more expensive and less reliable for us have large consequences in our real lives. I think that's intentional as well, because nothing Donald Trump is doing is making America great again for any of us in the working class. And this example from the Postal Service is like prime example of that reality.